Mutual aid is a guiding factor behind anarchist practice and an essential framework for understanding anarchist views on social organization more broadly. So, what is it exactly? Well, in its simplest form, mutual aid is a motivation at play anytime two or more people work together to solve a problem for the shared benefit of everyone involved. In other words, it means cooperation for the sake of the common good. Understood in this way, mutual aid is obviously not a new idea, nor is it exclusive to anarchists. In fact, the earliest human societies practiced mutual aid as a matter of survival, and to this day, there are countless examples of its logic found within the plant and animal kingdoms. To understand anarchists' specific embrace of mutual aid, we will need to go back over 100 years to the writings of the famous Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, who, in addition to sporting one of the most prolific beards of all time, just so happened to be an accomplished zoologist and evolutionary biologist. Back in Kropotkin's day, the field of evolutionary biology was heavily dominated by the ideas of social Darwinists such as Thomas H. Huxley. By ruthlessly applying Charles Darwin's famous dictum, survival of the fittest, to human societies, Huxley and his peers had concluded that existing social hierarchies were the result of natural selection, or competition between sovereign individuals, and were thus an important and inevitable factor in human evolution. Not too surprisingly, these ideas were particularly popular among rich and politically powerful white men, as it provided them a pseudoscientific justification for their privileged positions in society, in addition to providing a racist rationalization of the European colonization of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Kropotkin attacked this conventional wisdom when in 1902 he published a book called Mutual Aid, A Factor in Evolution, in which he proved that there was something beyond blind, individual competition at work in evolution. Kropotkin demonstrated that species that were able to work together, or who formed symbiotic arrangements with other species based on mutual benefit, were able to better adapt to their environment and were granted a competitive edge over those species who didn't or couldn't. In today's metropolitan societies, people are socialized to see themselves as independent, self-sufficient individuals, equipped with our own condos, bank accounts, smartphones, and Facebook profiles. However, this notion of human independence is a myth, promoted by corporations and states seeking to mold us into atomized and easily controlled consumers, concerned primarily with our own short-term well-being. The truth is that human beings are incredibly interdependent. In fact, that's the key to our success as a species. Do you ever spend time thinking about where the food you eat or the clothes you wear come from? What about the labor and materials that went into building your house or your car? Left to fend for ourselves without the comforts of civilization, few among us would survive a week, let alone be able to produce a fraction of the myriad commodities we consume every day. From the Great Pyramids commissioned by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to today's global spanning production and supply chains, the primary function of the ruling class has always been to organize human activity, and everywhere that they have done so, they have relied on coercion. Under capitalism, this activity is organized through either direct violence or the internalized threat of starvation created by a system based on private ownership of wealth and property. Capitalism can inspire people to do amazing things, as long as there is a profit to be made. But in the absence of a profit motive, there are many important tasks that it will not and cannot ever accomplish, from eradicating global poverty and preventable diseases to removing toxic plastics from the oceans. These monumental tasks require a change in the ethos that would connect us to one another and to the world that sustains us, a shift away from capitalism towards mutual aid. Glimpses of the anarchist ideal of mutual aid can be seen today in communities of open-source software developers and in programmers coming up with new forms of encryption to thwart NSA surveillance. It can be seen in neighbors coming together to organize a daycare collective, and in the aftermath of disasters such as Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, when in the absence of state institutions, perfect strangers rush to one another's aid. It can be seen in the bravery of the white helmets of Aleppo, who risk their lives to pull children from the collapsed ruins of buildings hit by Assad's barrel bombs. Imagine a world in which human activity was not organized on the basis of ceaseless competition over artificially scarce resources, but the pursuit of the satisfaction of human needs, and you will understand a vision of the world that anarchists seek to create.
You ready? Yep. And here we go. We're live.
All right. Good morning, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Adam Keller, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, David Story. It is Saturday, September 18th, 2021, and we're broadcasting live online on YouTube. As a reminder, we are on a temporary hiatus from broadcasting on our usual FM radio home of WVNN in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area, while our lead host, Jacob Morrison, is working out of town on Hurricane Ida recovery efforts. Today, we are talking about the last few weeks in Southern labor, courtesy of Jonah Furman's great newsletter, Who Gets the Bird. We'll highlight some of the big national labor stories. We'll touch on a few local interesting news items here in North Alabama, all that and more on today's Valley Labor Report. And remember, folks, if you want to see what we're up to throughout the week, get our snide quips about the news of the day, then follow us on social media, facebook.com/the Valley Labor Report, Twitter @Labor Reporters, Jacob's on there @JacobM_AL, and David's on there @Radical Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, search YouTube for the Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments throughout the week. We upload our program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So to see if we're on your listening platform of choice, go to the valleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. We do have a website, thevalleylaborreport.org, where you could buy our hats and stickers. We do hope to get some new merch available once Jacob has returned, and we are considering ourselves back at full strength. And if you appreciate our work and you want to keep us on the air, we would normally ask that you consider throwing us a couple of bucks on Patreon, patreon.com/the Valley Labor Report. I do believe our Patreon donations have been paused while we're in this semi-hiatus. But if you believe in this project, you can still help us for free by subscribing to our YouTube channel, liking and sharing our videos, leaving good reviews on our podcast, and all other ways of boosting our social media. The more likes, shares, and subscriptions we have, the more visible our content will be to new folks. And we now have a pretty extensive back catalog of both full episodes and specific interviews and topical segments that we hope are entertaining and educational. So, good morning, folks. Good morning, David. Thanks for getting us set up this morning. Again, as if you didn't hear us in the start, we are still, I guess we are maybe week 2 in our semi-hiatus. Our brother Jacob Morrison is down in the Gulf Coast region helping with Hurricane Ida recovery efforts. So in the meantime, we are taking a break from our FM radio broadcast, but we are still going to be bringing some online content to the extent that David and I can do that. We are no replacement for Jacob, of course, but we're going to still try to bring you some news. And today, we really wanted to catch everybody up on some of the activity with the National Labor Relations Board, some elections that have happened in unions, some big stories that we have coming out of John Deere, NABCO. We have some union busting stories that have made it into national news. And then there were a few local issues that I wanted to highlight and just kind of bring out there. I know some of you watching and listening today, you may not be anywhere near North Alabama. So some of the names may not be familiar to you, but a lot of the themes and the content will be, because it's pretty universal. Workers getting screwed, politicians being crooked, police being violent. The American story. So David, thanks for getting us all set up. I wanted to start with Southern labor, if that is cool with you, and just sort of see where we're at with new organizing and election wins across the South. Y'all who have been fans for a while know that we've been using Jonah Furman's newsletter, Who Gets the Bird? Usually comes out every Thursday. I really, really recommend you subscribe if you don't already. Typically, we try to highlight the activity from across the Southeast. And of course, you can check his newsletter for the full report that he does every week about, any and all NLRB activity, plus some other union highlights. We haven't done this in a few weeks because of the way our scheduling has gone. So wanted to catch us up from mid-August to really early September on what's happening across the South. And before I begin, I do want to send our thanks to Jonah for allowing us to use his material, and also congratulations to him. I don't think we've mentioned on the show yet, but Jonah has been hired by Labor Notes. And I think that is a great, great partnership, because most of you who listen to this show, Labor Notes does amazing work for the labor movement with research, reporting, training, resources, conferences. So I think it's cool that one of the best labor reporters out there, Jonah, is going to be hooked up with them and added to their team. So that's a great thing. I'm expecting, even more good work to come out of Labor Notes now that Jonah's on board. So let's get right to it with new organizing. I'm going to start back in August and kind of catch us all the way up. So I'll go through our new organizing and then some wins and strikes, and then move forward chronologically. So starting back in August 19th through August 26th, we did have new organizing that David will be very happy about. There were 162 workers at Viscase, which is a massive sausage casing food processing company, and they are organizing with the Machinist Union. Shout out Machinist.
I was over in Arkansas, right?
Yeah. And apparently, if successful, it'll be the biggest NLRB win in Arkansas in a couple years, and really one of the biggest wins in, I think they said, since 2007, biggest NLRB win. So way to go, Machinist, making some progress out in Arkansas. Best of luck with that campaign. There were 56 workers in Crystal City, Virginia, who work at a rock climbing gym called Earth Treks. They are unionizing with the Mid-Atlantic Regional Joint Board of Workers United. It's kind of a mouthful. Over in some smaller shops in Austin, Texas, you had 15 security guards there that joined the SPFPA. We see them pop up a lot, primarily with just security. There are 4 lab workers for chemical manufacturer Chemours in Bell, West Virginia, where workers recently sued over their firings related to whistleblowing about environmental and workplace safety. They are joining the mine workers, and it sounds like they damn sure need a union if it's gotten to that point. There were 3 aircraft mechanics for Invictus and 3 more at Amentum, both in Nashville, that are joining the Machinists, local SC 711, as are 2 flight instructors in Miami. So some more activity there out of the Machinists. Moving on to some election wins. The board finally did count the ballots, the impounded ballots, and the Collectivo Coffee Union vote back in April. And by a margin of 7 votes, IBEW Local 494 now represents 328 cafe, bakery, and warehouse workers across Chicago, Madison, and Milwaukee. No, that is not the South, but the Collectivo Coffee Union vote was kind of a big one, primarily because of this theme we've encountered on our show and a lot of the campaigns we've covered, this dichotomy between, liberal, progressive sounding language coming from the company that is quickly exposed for a bunch of BS as soon as the workers try to organize. There was a similar, in a similar vein, I guess you could say, 322 editorial employees at MSNBC did vote 141 to 58 to join the WGAE. Now, I know there's been a lot of internal political battles inside of that union about what kind of workers they should be bringing in. And in fact, their incumbent president thought they were bringing in too many workers to the union, which is not a very common complaint you hear from union leaders, having too many members. But we've talked about the MSNBC campaign on the show before. And as I said before, I do hope that that improves the nature of their content, though I won't hold out much hope. I am glad they have a union. There are 17 drivers and service techs down in Ocala, Florida, working for AmeriGas Propane that have organized. And let's see, I believe that is with the Teamsters, Local 79. There's also some more work by the Teamsters. Let's see here. 7 mechanics for Intermodal Mexico have also joined the Teamsters with Local 79. And that is down in Port Everglades and Miami Springs, Florida. And there were also 4 workers who processed limestone in Macon, Georgia, who voted 3-1 to join the steelworkers. So several wins in some really small shops. There was a loss in a small shop. 22 drivers for chemical maker Univar in Houston voted 10-12 not to join Teamsters Local 988. And I believe later on, as we get a little more recent, there's some more activity in that same Univar company in Houston. So a couple of the strikes that we'll get back to would be the NABCO strike, which did spread across all of their production facilities, as well as the long-running St. Vincent Hospital strike, which I believe is the longest strike in Massachusetts history now. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of update there later. And also wanted to mention the Harvard graduate student, W Local 5118. And we've talked with some grad student. Jonah believes, if anything, we should be surprised if a strike does not happen with the Harvard grad student union. So that's also something to keep your eye on. Curious to see how the Harvard administration responds to that. And, you know, another, again, more national one, but I think that's relevant to all of us as we enter the holidays, is in Southwest Airlines. The Southwest Airline Pilots Association, which is an independent union of about 10,000 pilots, along with TWU Local 556, who represents the flight attendants there at Southwest, they are talking about doing some informational pickets around the holidays to protest understaffing, as well as other operational failures, like lack of hotels and food for workers, which I imagine during the holidays is going to suck even worse. I think that's a pretty good idea to do your informational picket at the busiest time of the airports, when you have a captive audience. And this, instead of the traditional captive audience we think of with union busting meetings, in this case, the workers will have something of a captive audience with a lot of civilians sleeping in the airports, waiting in the airports and long lines and on uncomfortable chairs. And hopefully that'll give them an opportunity to have some good conversations with the customers as they build support for their campaign. There's similar issues at American Airlines. And of course, we've all seen news stories of flight attendants taking a lot of abuse from passengers as of late. Some airlines are being more restrictive about alcohol use on the plane because it's gotten so bad with folks getting on there and just acting like total jackasses to their flight attendants. Where, David, correct me if I'm wrong about this, maybe you saw this story. I'm pretty sure they actually had to duct tape somebody not too long ago. They had to duct tape a drunk, unruly passenger to his chair. Because he was being sexually harassing of the flight attendants. So I want to move on to some more recent Southern labor activity, getting us into the month of September. There were 17 workers over in Garland, Texas, but at Univar, so the same company that we just saw in Houston that voted against joining the Teamsters. Well, over in Garland, pretty close by, they are organizing with the Operating Engineers, Local 564. There are 2 workers for Arbormetric Solutions, which appears to be a staffing agency providing utility workers to Kentucky Power and Appalachian Power up in Hazard, Kentucky. And they are joining IBEW Local 369. So where two or more workers gather, you can have a union, and that's proof of that. Shout out to those two. In an election win, there were 57 security guards for WellPath, which is a medical facility associated with the jails down in Florida City, Florida, and they voted 22-0 to join the SPFPA. There were 9 workers at steel and aluminum supplier EMJ Metals in Orlando, which voted 5-4 to join the steelworkers. 9 security guards in Hapeville, Georgia, joined UGSO Local 291, voted 8-0 there. And moving forward to some other Southern activities, that got us into the month of September. A couple of other activities before we get to some more new organizing and election wins. Worth remembering that ATU Local 1031 in Beaumont, Texas, has been without a contract for about a year. Those are transit workers, and they have been appealing to their city council, hoping to get some help in negotiations with First Transit. We'll see if we have any updates here in the next couple of weeks about that. There were firefighters on strike in Alexandria, Virginia, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's kind of a suburb of DC. It's a pretty wealthy suburban area, lots of folks who work in the Beltway political class. Well, the firefighters there have their first ever union contract and their first increase in base pay since 2008, which is pretty awesome. And public sector collective bargaining is something that was legalized recently in Virginia. And what you're seeing is industry by industry and local by local, they're having to fight to obtain these first contracts. But where they do, they're making some real gains. So I think that's awesome to see out of Virginia. And, kudos to the firefighters and teachers and all the other government employees who are organizing there, taking advantage of this new opportunity. Elsewhere in Virginia, there were 3,100 UFCW members across 21 Kroger stores who approved a new contract by a pretty wide margin, with the biggest win appearing to be that they kept their current healthcare plan. Starting wages went up to $12.35 an hour. We also saw some organizing in Missouri with 2,800 pork processing workers for Triumph Foods, which is based in St. Joseph, Missouri. They are all getting a raise through a new agreement with UFCW, this time Local 2. And they're raising their starting wage to $20 an hour, which is not bad, relatively speaking, for meatpacking workers. So way to go, guys. And St. Joseph, Missouri. All right, moving forward. In San Antonio, there was some more developments with the police union there. And now I know police unions are a controversial issue here in the labor movement. There's some debate about whether or not they really count as a labor union. But to the extent that you include them, they did beat a ballot measure that would have revoked their collective bargaining rights in San Antonio, Texas. So the police union doesn't have a contract there. It looks like there's a lot of dispute between the city and the union on disciplinary procedures for the police. So that's one of those really controversial and interesting angles to the labor movement, where you see unionism intersects with criminal justice, and I'll mention criminal justice later from the local perspective, but something to keep your eye on as
not really controversial on our part.
Not controversial on our part, no, not at all. But even the union I belonged to previously, National Staff Organization, that we've covered here on the show, represents some prison guards. One of the kind of strange industries that got into our union. So there's a lot of debate about whether border patrol, security guards, prison guards, police officers, are they all the same? Which ones should we really include in the labor movement, if any? Those are good conversations to have as we all talk about how to reform the police and really protect the people from the police. Moving forward, I do want to mention in the Texas, there was I guess, what sounds like a good development in Texas for K-12 education retirees. The legislature in Texas has advanced a bill to give a one-time $2,400 check to all the retired educators. But according to Jonah, it sounds nice, but it really isn't, considering the alternative proposal was an actual true cost of living increase across the board. And retirees there in Texas haven't seen a COLA, or cost of living increase, in 8 years. Very similar story here in Alabama. We've seen these bonus checks from time to time for all the K-12 education retirees, but a COLA, where they actually have some percentage increase in retirement benefits to keep up with cost of living, that seems to be pretty much off the table in Alabama and many states, unfortunately. Moving forward, I know that this is a little bit of a national story, but SAG and AFTRA, the two major unions for entertainers, for Hollywood actors, they've had a very contentious election between Fran Drescher and I believe Matthew Modine was the other candidate there. From what I understand, there's been no clear victory for either side. And so that will catch us up to more recently, last week in September. I want to mention that there was a new election filing in Prattville, Alabama, only about 3 hours from here or so, depending on where you're heading from. 26 workers who make brake pads for the Brazilian auto parts company Fras-le in Prattville, they are organizing with the RWDSU Mid-South Council, the same RWDSU from Bamazon fame. So shout out to them, wishing them a lot of luck with that new organizing campaign. Looking through, there wasn't a ton of activity across the Southeast with at least new organizing campaigns or elections. There was a lot of activity across the country, just not a lot happening here in the South. And I wanted to see if we have any other pressing ones. I don't think so. Most of the activity seems to be concentrated either out west on the West Coast or in the New England area, with some major higher education activity happening up in Michigan. You had several union contracts that were up for a vote in Michigan recently. And there was actually a 2-day strike at Oakland University up in Michigan. So Michigan's got a lot of higher ed contract battles and strikes that are coming to a close. Outside of that, I'm not seeing a lot of activity in the South. Were there any new campaigns, new organizing maybe that you're familiar with in the Southeast that we haven't included? Feel free to comment in, let us know. Would definitely like to know about it. Let's see, it looks like we did have a comment that Pierre has filed a ULP, or at least someone has filed a ULP in a lawsuit against Walmart. If I'm not mistaken, Pierre is from Indiana, so
Pierre is one of those hard-hitting members. He's been with us basically from the beginning, and he's very active in organizing. So,
well, keep us posted on that for sure. How the ULP plays out. It can be a long, tiresome process, but stay patient and definitely keep us posted on that. David, did you have any union activity from the Southeast that I may have mentioned? May have not mentioned?
No, it looks like you've covered it all. I'll say, as a point of personal privilege here, our members are gearing up to go into negotiations in about September, about 5 months. So actually, we'll be going down to the Cape at the end of this month. Yeah, I got 5 brothers is heading down there this not this Saturday, but next Saturday. Yeah, a week from today to start negotiating prep.
Okay, yeah, and we've talked a little bit about this on the show before, how much prep and training is goes into trying to negotiate the contract. Um, you know, folks don't just roll out of bed and walk to the bargaining table and pull it out of their rear end. It takes a lot of homework, a lot of research, a lot of time and effort and energy before you even make it to the first negotiations.
Yeah.
You've done a lot
Yeah.
of math. I remember the first bargaining chair that I dealt with. She was, well, no, she was not our bargaining chair. She was maybe kind of our budget guru. And she had pieces of paper taped all along the wall because she couldn't even find chart paper big enough to do all the math she was doing in terms of salary adjustments, healthcare premiums, and retirement contributions. It made my head hurt just looking at it. So you gotta have some folks with some math skills. You gotta have, of course, your smart readers who can catch little details. You've got to have the folks who are actually good at negotiation and having the conversations. There's a lot of different skills that come to the bargaining team that are necessary to be successful.
Yeah, well, I mean, luckily in the machinist unit, we're very lucky. Up in Maryland, we've got what we call a strategic resources department, and they're comprised of labor lawyers, what do you call it, financial specialists, whatever you call these people, and basically we do a survey. They do all the information requests, and then they compile all the data and send it back to us. It's really good.
That's huge, and I think that's why as much as I love to see it when workers are out kind of doing their own organizing without relying on outside unions, because you don't necessarily. Man, it could really it could be helpful, because trying to do all of that on your own, on your free time, right, outside of work, it's very difficult. And of course, the bosses typically have a big advantage there.
Yeah, well, and it's difficult for people to, average healthcare costs and estimate healthcare costs through the life of the contract and figure out what the hourly rate or what the hourly cost of this healthcare is going to be, throughout the life and things like that. Not saying that we don't have some very smart members, but when you've got these financial advisors, that's what they're paid to do, and within about the company makes a offer, and then within about 15 or 20 minutes, the advisor says, "Well, this is what it's going to."
Ahead.
Let's see here. Can you hear me, Adam?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, sorry. We're streaming this from the house, so I just noticed that my internet is very unstable. So hopefully we're not dropping out. Yeah, I mean they've done a good job, and then our members have come in and basically negotiate the contract with the company. Takes about 2 weeks, and then come back and present to the membership what we've negotiated and let them vote on it, and majority wins. The wonderful thing about democracy.
Right. And you know what? If you're on the losing side of that contract fight, you still had your vote. And you can certainly feel free for the next 2 years, 3 years, however long the contract exists. Every time you're griping and moaning about it, you could tell people, "Hey, I voted no. Here's why." And you can be building your support for what language needs to get put in the next contract.
Yeah.
Sometimes, unfortunately, you got to kind of learn from where you went wrong to know what to do better the next time. And something that I participated in through NSO as a bargaining team member was we had these coordinated bargaining councils, I believe is what they're called. And basically, we would all get together, the bargaining teams from the different states, and break down by region. So, our Yankee sisters and brothers in the Northeast would all gather together. Those of us in the South would gather together. If you had comparable cost of living and employers, and we would actually bust out our contracts and compare notes. We would, compare the specific language on leave provisions and things of that nature. And that was also incredibly helpful. So there again, having a national union where you do have folks in other areas who already, maybe they negotiated their contracts 6 months ago or a year ago under similar conditions, and then you can check your notes, learn maybe from where they, messed up, perhaps, or learn from where they really had some wins. That's a big resource that if you're trying to do it completely on your own, it's going to be a struggle. It's not impossible by any means. Because something else that I've learned on, throughout my experience is that sometimes these folks in management aren't nearly as smart as they think they are. Same with the lawyers and the union busters or experts that they bring in on their side of the table. All those degrees and all those credentials don't necessarily make them invincible or intelligent compared to you, honestly. Sometimes there's just common sense that you have that they lack. So don't feel intimidated, even if you are working without the great national support that some unions provide.
No, I mean that's something that y'all talk about consistently on the radio, is the fact that the bosses don't know how to organize the workplace. The workers know best how to organize the workplace, how to get the work done, how to get it done efficiently and out the door. And that's a struggle constantly with every union, is the distrust that the management has with the workers on the floor. And the consistent talking points of the union is, we can show you how to do this more efficiently, and save money. And and that's what we're trying to do, save money so we can make more money.
Right.
But there's just an absolute distrust. So yeah, I mean, the bosses are very rarely smart about production operations. So generally, the workers know more than anybody.
Right. And I see where Cameron mentioned they started organizing some city workers in a jurisdiction that prohibits public sector collective bargaining. So I know that's an uphill battle for sure. But
I mean,
collective
that's the
bargaining
way it
is
is with a
not.
lot of the employees in our state.
Right. Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, that's kind of for all public sector folks here in Alabama and much of the South, that's our reality. Collective bargaining is not the end all be all. As great as it is, that's, you can secure some victories. You can organize without collective bargaining being an outlet. I would say it's harder in some ways because even your victories are often more fleeting because they're not solidified in a contract necessarily. So, they lack some of the permanency and the enforcement mechanisms sometimes that you can get with a CBA victory. But that said, it's totally possible. And I think some of it is just you got to be creative in some of the tactics that you're using.
Well,
Um,
when you're organizing outside of that collective bargaining agreement, that's something that the IWW does a lot, uh, and it relies more on grassroots worker-led solidarity. And I mean, you've seen what you had, the teachers in West Virginia, the teachers in Oakland over the past few years. Yes, they got collective bargaining agreements, but they don't have the right to strike. And they pulled it pull it off by building those grassroots worker-led solidarity events. So um, there's a lot that can be done outside of the CBA. I know a lot of times when we rely on the CBA, it's a wonderful thing to have, but it's also a double-edged sword
Yeah.
because you get into this. Uh, let's just wait for 3 years. There's no
Hmm.
reason to take action now, and it lulls members into a false sense of security. That we can't fix anything right now, or things like that. Instead of building power on the shop floor, there's a lot of things that can be done. Uh, as far as work to rule, and I have to be careful about what I say, especially with us coming up in the negotiation.
Sure.
But
We're all talking hypothetically,
yeah, but
theoretically, academic
theoretically,
discussions.
yeah. But I mean, there's definitely workplace slowdowns that can happen, and I'm not saying anybody should skirt the rules, but we all know that going back to management are traditionally idiots. They write a lot of work rules that simply don't work on the shop floor. And if you work to those rules, in many cases, work don't get done.
Hmm.
So there's ways of applying pressure outside of a CBA.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think with the public sector, obviously at some point you have elected officials who are in your chain of hierarchy. Um, at some point, there are public meetings involving these officials. So those are opportunities to organize around too, because, while I think David and I are 100% on the same page in our feelings about electoral politics, it is a leverage point that you have. Same with packing city council meetings or school board meetings or, county commission meetings, whatever, whoever your employer may be in the public sector.
Yeah, probably more leverage in the Northeast and out west than what we see here, but there's still leverage points to be
Oh
had.
yeah, and I can tell you from experience that a city council member or a school board member really doesn't expect too many people to show up to those meetings, and if even a handful of the workers show up, they're suddenly looking around, they're whispering, trying to figure out who the people are that are there, why are they there. It can start to put some pressure on them. And I did it more in the school perspective. We had the Red for Ed campaigns, and so you'd have 20 teachers show up to a school board meeting with their red shirt, the red union shirt, some signs, depending on the situation. And media typically covers these meetings, right? Unfortunately, not as well as they used to, but depending on where you're at, it's likely there is a reporter there. And so, again, going back to like, how do you organize and gain some ground without collective bargaining? You do have to be creative. And I would say that media can be a weapon that you can use with it being public sector, because anytime it's public sector, it's always political because it involves tax dollars and therefore, on some level, really involves everybody in the community. And that is also a double-edged sword because it's very easy and they've had great success in demonizing public sector workers over the past several decades and turning the average taxpayer, quote unquote, against the public sector.
But that Adam, that goes back to the same we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It is generally not the public sector worker that is at fault, and that's
Mm-mm.
something that's something that the tables need to be turned on. And you can speak specifically to this coming out of the industry that that you were in. the teachers get a lot of blame for the state education, in Alabama, how terrible the teachers are, and this and that and the other. And the fact is, the teachers have very little say on what they can do and what they can't do. And public sector workers are the same. They
Hmm.
they they get beat up constantly by the public. Say, for example, the potholes in the street. Man,
Yeah.
that ain't these folks' fault. It's the piss poor management in the elected positions that are killing the public sector workers. But and going back to the teachers are the same way. They get beat up on all of this stuff, and it's rarely they're just following the rules.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, I like the pothole example. The rank and file worker who actually fills those potholes, he doesn't get to pick which potholes get fixed and which ones don't. He doesn't get to pick the budget that's allocated to the department. The
Guarantee when those
schedule,
people are driving by and they're screaming out the window, yelling at them, "Why hadn't you done this?" Why? And it's
right,
because they haven't got a choice.
right, right. And you're exactly right about teachers. They're just working with what they have. They don't get to pick who comes to their class. They don't get to pick what materials they use necessarily. Um, and even if they do, it's only within certain restrictions uh, that they were not consulted about. They certainly don't allocate the budgets. So, they don't set policies around COVID and whether you wear a mask or little Johnny wears a mask. So yeah, they're catching a lot of heat and a lot of vitriol really about these policies that they don't write. They don't write them. They don't pass them. They don't enforce them. Um, as something the great Richard Wolff talks about when he talks about class divides, he mentions the order takers and the order givers. And I can assure you that the teachers in a school, when it comes to the workplace, they are not the order givers. They may have to manage their classroom, and some of them can be pretty damn tough on those kids. And they may give the kids plenty of orders, but that doesn't mean they're giving any orders around how the operations of the school are functioning. And the same goes for any of those public sector meetings. Public sector workers. And the follow-up comment to that was that the Cameron City Council gets triggered whenever activists come to city council meetings, literally calling activists terrorists. Not surprised whatsoever by that. As someone who's had run-ins with security guards and things of that nature at these public meetings, been there, I've done that. I know exactly what you mean. It's amazing how people who work for the public on public tax dollar dime to govern the public just completely shit a brick when the public shows up to pay attention.
Yeah, it's
Um,
amazing when their bosses show up, ain't it?
right, right. How dare you, as a citizen or as an employee of this city or town or district, show up to actually pay attention?
Well,
Um,
that speaks a lot to how the average ordinary person has been lulled into this idea that they can't change anything, and why the city council and why the government at large in general pretty much does what they want because there's no pushback on them. And when
mhm.
there is pushback on it, all of a sudden they start calling you terrorist, because you're holding them accountable for the decisions that they've made that generally have a detrimental effect on the general society.
Right, right. And it's the same kind of mentality, I think, between bosses and politicians. And in this case, with public sector, they're kind of the same people. Um, where if you dare advocate for yourself and your colleagues, that's considered disrespectful or disloyal. Um, I've definitely had many of supervisors throughout my career who told me that I was being disrespectful for advocating for employees. Um, Never raising my voice, never using a cuss word, um, never resorting to personal insults or anything of that nature, but to simply talk about issues. Um, is beyond the pale for many of these politicians and bosses. I think, like you said, David, they've been so insulated. They are so used to just kind of going along and without pushback. They're used to people not paying attention to what they do. So there is a lot of value in shining a light on their activities. Um, Something that I know has been a problem, like in Huntsville, Alabama. There, the city government there has really struggled with transparency. And it's taken media, lawyers, grassroots activism just to get basic like public records released from city government. So, it's definitely an uphill battle, but I really encourage those of you who are in public sector industries, if you don't have collective bargaining, that's not the end of the world. It's certainly possible to get some real gains and victories, and see what you can get solidified. If you don't, maybe you can't have something enshrined in a contract, but you can maybe have an MOU.
Yeah,
That
and there's never nothing that precludes you from gaining that collective bargaining agreement
correct.
later on. That's something that encompasses the building power aspect of creating that worker solidarity across the whatever industry you may be in. You may not have a CBA right now, but that don't mean you can't get it through
Right.
negotiations and building that power.
Right. I mean, because at some point, if you're strong enough and cohesive enough, the bosses may prefer to sit down and bargain a contract with you as opposed to wildcat strikes and whatever else you may be able to pull off if you're that strong. So I think it's all about the basics that we talk about a lot: building relationships, growing the solidarity, taking a committee that expands outward, um, and does have support amongst rank and file. All those things are true whether you have a legal contract process or not, whether you have a legal strike right or not. Those are fundamentals that kind of cut across industry and law, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of building power and kind of pivot on to another topic, to where look at what's happening in the NABCO right now. You've got that. Granted, they've got a CBA, but they're separated. You've got folks out in Washington, isn't it Washington?
Yeah, from the top
The
northwest corner to
Yeah, to
Georgia.
Chicago, to Georgia, and they've all built those internal communications, those that solidarity from workplace to workplace, and I mean they're giving it to them right now. Just this past week, they voted down another contract, and and basically a shit contract that was going to force regular 40-hour work pay onto the weekend. To
Oh,
where, yeah, exactly.
no.
To where they were splitting the shifts up. They were going to move some of the shift some of the work onto the weekends, no premium pay, and then of course the low senior employees and members were going to be tasked to accept that shift. It's an absolute shit contract, and I'm proud to see them standing up against it.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes people may wonder, well, why did they even bring that to the membership in the first place? Well, I'm not there, so I can't speak to that specific instance. But in general, um, the bargaining team has a responsibility to bring to the membership whatever they can hammer out. And it's possible that people on that team that bargained that contract or that TA that they brought to the membership didn't even want to vote for it.
Yeah, I mean
That
that
happens
happens
sometimes.
regularly. It
Yeah.
happened, it happened with us a few contracts ago with when they offered up our pension, and it's a democratic voice at the end of the day.
Hmm.
When there's an offer been made, you have to bring it back to the membership and say, hey, what do y'all think? We think it's
Right.
shit, but we're still giving you the opportunity to vote on it.
Right. Right. And that's not to say that the opposite doesn't happen, where sometimes there's pressure to accept a temporary agreement and go ahead and ratify it, even though it sucks. Sometimes, there are leaders who will put that pressure, but I think that's why the having a democratic union, having more rank and file engagement and input really helps. Because if you do get to that situation where, for whatever reason, your leadership team and your bargaining team's bringing you a crappy contract, you'll be strong enough to vote no and to hold the line and send them back to the table to get something better. So that, I think that's really, really important, that even if you're not serving as an officer, you're not serving as a bargaining team member, man, you got a lot you can do to really influence the direction of the union, and really the lives of you and your fellow workers.
Yep. Yeah, as we're seeing with the carpenters union out in, I believe that's also Washington. They called for a strike this past week. There was, oh man, it's a tremendous. I think they said there was about 10,000 carpenters in this area, and only about 2,600 of them were able to go on strike because the union leadership and these other locals had signed no strike agreements,
Oh,
basically. Yeah,
yeah.
so you've got these carpenters, the more of the grassroots, um, worker led. They're calling it I think they're calling it the Peter McGuire Foundation, basically a name after the founder of the Carpenters Union, and they're saying we're refusing to go to work. If our brothers and sisters are on strike, we should be on strike as well. And you're seeing that tremendous labor notes, as Luis
Yeah.
has wrote a couple articles this past week on it, and yeah, you're seeing a strong upswell of workers pushing back against this. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had missed that story. But yeah, I see where Luis over at Labor Notes has put out a great article there. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and along with Nabisco, because I knew Nabisco had still been on strike. I didn't realize that a tentative agreement had been put out recently.
Yeah,
So
just this past, I think a couple of days ago. The way and that's strange because we have an amalgamated contract as well, where Decatur, Vandenberg, California, and the Cape Canaveral, we all fall under the same contract. We negotiate collectively with an equal number of members from each side, but we also vote. We time our CBA vote to where Vandenberg, Decatur, and the Cape is all voting at the same time. Nabisco, unfortunately, hadn't done that. They had one vote. Now, I think yesterday Chicago voted, and I don't know when Georgia votes. So it kind of out the answer of whether they'll
yeah,
stay on strike or not. So yeah, and I've done a lot of research the last couple of days on that, and I can't tie that down to when we'll have a for sure answer to whether they stay on strike or not. But reading through the articles from the labor leaders in Chicago and out there in Washington, they're saying they think they got the numbers no matter what. So we'll see what happens.
I feel like that could probably impact voter turnout and the vote result, possibly when it's like segmented like that, where,
Yeah,
because of course you can talk to folks in this city and find out, okay, well, how do you think it went? How many people showed up? I'm sure you can get some info, and instead of everybody voting at the same time. Seems like that would probably be a better, more accurate pulse of where the membership's at if everybody does it at once. But you know, I don't know why it's that particular system there.
yeah, I don't like I say. I guess every international has a different way of doing things, and I
Mm-hmm.
try to stay in my lane and not not demean any other unions for the way they do things.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, you got practices that developed
Yeah.
because of certain reasons in the industry, or just because of historical precedents, things that have evolved over years. Because some of these unions are a century old, decades old. So yeah, I with you like that, and I certainly hope that my rambling on here never is interpreted as a shots at any particular unions or how they do things, because it's true. They most of them do things a little differently, even if a lot of the big concepts are the same. And
Yeah, but
you
all
know,
of that to say, don't buy Nabisco products. If you're in the
yeah,
store, there is a ton of products that's made by Nabisco, and my wife's had some medical issues, so I've been doing a lot of the grocery shopping lately, and it is a nightmare trying to go through all of these products. And I'm like, and here's the thing, and this needs to be said, it's something that irritates the shit out of me. But a lot of times you'll have a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but you'll have some people that say there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. I get that. But the point is, this is not a black and white issue. uh, there are more ethical uh, possibilities than there are. It's not an on off switch. Uh,
right. It's more
it's
nuanced than that.
Yeah, and making this statement that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism doesn't absolve you of your duty to not cross that picket line, and that picket line is in the grocery store as well. It's not purchasing those products when those members are out on strike.
Right. I mean, if you really need some cookies, don't buy Oreos. Go to the bakery. I mean, because I've heard that too, and I agree with you that no, it's not always possible to be aware of every single picket line or to be aware of every boycott, uh, or maybe for whatever reason, particular product is all you have available for you. But that said, we all make choices with where we spend our money.
Yeah.
And we all have some degree of flexibility there that if you can exercise it in a good way, I think that's a good thing to do. No, it's not, substitute for the revolution or, victory for these workers in particular, but is something that I think we can all do. And um, hopefully, this show and a lot of the other media that we support can help folks really know what is happening so you can be aware of it. If you're out here buying Nabisco products because you didn't even know they were on strike, well, you know, I wish you knew, but I can't hate on you too much for that. Uh, me personally, I do try to think about where I spend my money. That's not to say I've never bought at Amazon. Unfortunately, Amazon and Walmart are monopolies, and it's hard to avoid them. But yeah, to the extent that you can honor any picket line, I think that is a really good way to use your money, what little bit we have. So do not
It
buy
is part of
Nabisco.
voting power.
Yeah,
It,
exactly. And
it's just
supporting
like
these
you were.
folks.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and supporting these folks, and so that hopefully, when you're in a position to call a picket line yourself, they will honor you and back you up too.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like you were saying earlier with the city council. There's specific pressure points that every union has, and this is one of those pressure points. And part of us being workers and building that working class solidarity is when they say, "Hey, don't buy these products." We're fighting for a better contract, and damn it, we don't buy these products. It's just as simple as that. and
Yeah,
and and there's no, don't tell, because you can't have your cookies and cream ice cream, with your Oreos mixed in. That ain't gonna kill you for a few weeks.
right.
Or what it may be.
Yeah,
It's the
and
same with buying union products. When we can buy union products, you know, the Valley Labor Report's been selling hats for the past few months. Those hats were made in a union shop, and they were made in a union shop because we know those workers had the opportunity to democratically vote on a contract that they thought benefited themselves, unlike non-union shops. So we purchase at at all costs, and we know it's going to be a little bit higher. We're going to pay a little bit more, but you know what? Those workers have had a say in their workplace, and it's good to support that type of movement.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I've been shocked number of, well, maybe I shouldn't say shocked, but I've been disappointed at the number of progressive organizations and even labor unions themselves who do not buy union products. Sorry, having a little bit of trouble with my mic here, but
No, you're
uh,
coming through great.
okay, cool, yeah. But I mean, I've seen that where these nonprofits, NGOs, and yeah, sometimes unions themselves, they're gonna go buy a bunch of T-shirts with their brand on it, and they don't even make sure that it's union made.
Yep.
Seems
Yeah,
like an easy thing to do.
yeah, one of the things that surprised me most was the first AFL-CIO conference in the state AFLs uh, that I attended. There were probably 75 to 100 politicians that came in, a majority Democrat politicians asking for our vote, for our endorsement. And they all had business cards, they all had handbills, they all had flyers. Uh, Out of that whole group, to the best of my knowledge, there was only one that actually had union made business cards. And it was appalling to see these folks come into a union hall and ask for our endorsement while using scab products. And Judge Vance, I'll call him out by name because he was the only one that I recall that had a union business card with him.
That's that seems like such an easy thing, right? I mean, you're going to the state union convention. Folks are going to look. You know, but I think that is evidence, I guess, of how little union labor means to so many politicians and so many folks who say they're on our side. It's one thing to talk about; it's another thing to be about it with your own resources and finances. And I know folks who've worked for these organizations who are given these limited budgets, and when they bring up this issue, it's like, oh well, I guess you'll just get less T-shirts, which puts that worker in a bad position. Do I, let my job suffer, quote unquote, uh, just for trying to honor our values by having union-made products? Shouldn't be
Yeah.
that way.
Well,
That
I
should be
mean,
a
you said
that should be
you
common policy.
yeah. Well, you made the perfect statement, and used the perfect word. Our values. That should be our values. You know, it's not something that you just throw away because, oh well, I can get 100 more business cards if I use some
Hmm.
scab shop. You know, this is about the values of the working class, and it's important to us as union members to see people that say they're going to support us to do that, because
Yeah.
there's a big difference between coming into a AFL meeting and saying I'm here to support you, and then you look at their card and you say, well, why didn't you choose one of the easiest ways to support us, buying union products? If you can't do that, then I can guarantee for the rest of the 2 or 4 years that you're going to be in office, we can't count on you.
Right. Right. I mean, it's in their interest to do this because you may suck as a politician, but guess what? Who the workers who made that card for you are going to at least know that you cared enough to get your card made there. Um, yeah, I think that is a easy way we can be intentional um, as supporters of the labor movement and as working class folks. Are we using our own money to that effect, and are we pressuring politicians and others to actually use their money to that effect as well. David, there were a couple of local things I did want to mention before we wrapped up today, because some of them are sort of continuations of bigger issues that we've discussed before. And we've talked a lot about the, staffing shortages and the, whining and complaining from business owners on the local news about, how they can't find anyone who wants to work, supposedly. Now, keep in mind, Alabama long ago ended extra pandemic unemployment benefits and has seen no change in unemployment, job applications, or any of the data. But that aside, we see these stories a lot, and we've seen these stories pop up at the local level too. No matter where you're tuning in from, chances are you've probably seen it there too. And just this week here in Huntsville, WAFF aired a story talking about nurses at Huntsville Hospital. And those of you not in the area, Huntsville Hospital has kind of become a monopoly of sorts. All the local hospitals have all pretty much been bought out by them, even in nearby counties. And so you had these two interesting articles that came out on different outlets on different days, but in the same week. One of them talked about Huntsville Hospital setting up a foundation, raising money for their employees who are quote unquote heroes. The other one, though, talked about the actual working conditions. And you had anonymous nurses, they protected their identity for fear of reprisal, but they described unsafe working conditions, short staffing, all the extra hazard and stress that all of that causes, plus the pandemic itself. And they're dealing with all those things, and they're getting low pay, even by the standards of this region, which is certainly not the wealthiest in the country. So you have this disconnect between employers like Huntsville Hospital, who want to call their folks heroes. They want to bring cake and balloons to the to the lounge, the staff lounge, but they don't want to actually do anything on a material basis for the workers. And one of the nurses actually said in this article that the hospital management should be fearful of a strike. And I thought that was interesting. They don't have a union in Huntsville Hospital, as far as we are aware. So I think that's pretty important that they would even mention that. I do think it's important that nurses have a union. And in this case, where looks like they don't, at least not yet, I hope that they are really organizing collectively to try to address those issues they discuss, because that could also be the beginning of a union. And I hope it will be. But I thought that was interesting, though. We've seen these, stories all across the country, and had a little bit of a local flavor to it as well with the nurses. There was a similar story a couple of weeks back, but this time it was the cafeteria workers in Huntsville City Schools. That one's near and dear to my heart. Someone who used to represent those workers, I can tell you, those are some of the hardest working ladies in the school district. They do one of the most essential jobs, not just in our schools, but in our communities, because so many of our kids don't get fed without their work. But despite that, they typically are the lowest paid employees in the school district. And they were dealing with similar issues to the nurses in that safety concerns, low pay, short staffing. In their case, I can tell you, I know personally some management bullying. And all of that has been amplified by the pandemic, and as well as the practice of privatization that we've discussed before, where government, public sector jobs are outsourced to temporary staffing agencies. And so you have public funds going to private interests, profitable private interests, who provide the labor instead of the city or the school district hiring it themselves. And in the case of these cafeteria workers, what that means on a material basis is that they don't have state health insurance or a state retirement pension or the state due process rights that you get when you're employed directly by the school district. And for all the inadequacies of all three of those areas I just mentioned, it's a hell of a lot better than not having it at all. And surprise, surprise, they have a hard time recruiting people to work for these staff agencies for low pay, no benefits, and no protection. So those were a couple of the big, staffing shortage stories at the local level. There were a couple of other things that have happened lately, primarily discussing, the city of Huntsville, their transparency issues, the criminal justice issues. I think I actually want to do kind of a separate conversation about that. Might just pop in later this week and do a little small live stream to talk about that, especially some of the Officer Darby case intrigue that has continued even after his guilty conviction. So if you're interested,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
this
go ahead.
whole Zoom thing back and forth is the timing's a nightmare. But let's talk about this privatization of public services, because that what you're talking about with cafeteria workers is, as you well know, this is not the first time that politicians talk about we're going to save money by privatizing public services, and on its face is laughable. Anytime you privatize a public service, right now, those cafeteria workers that are employed publicly, whether they be in another state or in our state, they are being paid by taxpayer dollars. There's no one profiting off of that service except for those workers. When you privatize that, any industry, you're bringing in multi-level managers, you're bringing in the owner, possibly shareholders, stakeholders, CEOs, different things like that. Everybody's getting a cut.
Right.
But generally, the CEOs and the managers are getting the lion's share of the cut. So the workers are getting less. People that actually don't do the work are getting paid more. And that is the privatization of public services. It's rarely about saving money. It's about shifting this work over to one of the legislators or the city councilors' buddies, so they can profit off of this business and make money off the taxpayer dollars. It's as simple as that, and people need to keep that in mind. It is never about saving money. It's all about someone enriching themselves and they constantly talk about freeloaders. Here, in the past few months, all we've heard about is people unwilling to work because unemployment's so high. They're freeloaders. The freeloaders in this society and our economy are the managers and the CEOs who do no work and profit off of our work. It's as simple as that. There is no other conversation to be had. Either you work or you don't. And if you don't work, if you're one of those managers, if you're one of those CEOs, one of those CFOs, and that's your whole job is to take a paycheck and do nothing, then you are a freeloader. Simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it is kind of, it should be laughable on its face, because what you're asking me to believe is that you are going to save money by inserting middlemen. Now, where in our experience does that ever actually work, where the more middlemen you put in there in a transaction, the more money you save? It's just totally.
It saves money as far as it takes money out of the workers' pockets
Bingo.
that's actually doing the work and transfers it up to the wealthy. it is no more than a shift of wealth from us to them. And you can look for the last year and a half, 2 years through this pandemic, and look at the bottom 1% and the top nine. I mean the top 1% and the bottom 99%, and look at whose wages has increased, and look at whose wages has either remained stagnant or decreased. This is a tremendous shift, and it has been all through the last 40 years of this neoliberal shit, is taking money out of our pockets and enriching the wealthy, taking money away from the workers and putting it to those who don't work.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think this has been one of their weapons is this privatization because, they're taking money from workers. They're taking money from the public treasury. Um, they're sabotaging state services. And so that all plays into their hands because the more they can sabotage the services, the easier it is to gain support for more privatization, right? And the next layer of workers they're going to screw over, and the next contract they're going to get with public tax dollars. That's one of the key weapons that they've used through this neoliberal era you mentioned, is the more they can sabotage state services like public schools, like trash collection, like road construction, whatever it may be, they want to intentionally make it worse from the inside so they can direct funds inside out to their external private pockets. Um, and the people who suffer from that are the workers involved, because that's where any savings are coming from. It's from screwing them over and taking it out of their paychecks and benefits, and from the broader community. Because at the end of the day, you're going to get inferior services, whatever that may be. So, and I think that has absolutely been one of the key ways that this skyrocketing wealth inequality has played out. And while so many people think it's basically impossible for us to change it, right? Because we've been trained to believe that there are no alternatives, that this is just the way it's got to be. You can't do good things with government. Government's the bad guy. You can't provide more wealth to the bottom. You've got to give it to the top because that's the job creators. Those are the people, that are creating jobs, creating the wealth of our economy. And everything about it is completely bass backwards. And I hope, if nothing else, that coming out of this crisis of the pandemic and a time where really we had never resolved the 2008 crisis, we were still living in the shadow of the Great Recession. Here we are with yet another recession, with yet more bailouts, more money just printed freely for those at the top, while most folks are struggling to make ends meet. I hope that it has been a wake-up call. And when we see the reports of these new union campaigns and these strike activities, it does make me feel a little bit warm and fuzzy that, maybe that is the case, and that more and more working people are starting to see how we're getting screwed, who's doing the screwing, and how we can make it stop.
Yeah, well, certainly these nurses, to circle back around to what you was talking about earlier, certainly these nurses are seeing it.
Right.
And I've done some research on this the past few months, and if it's a surprise to Jacob when I sent it to him the other week. If you look at what's happening in the hospitals, the with of course the hospitals are full. The nurses are getting screwed. I'm sure there's more people. We constantly talk about the nurses, but there's people that have to clean these beds. There's people that have to fix the food. There's people that
Mm-hmm.
have to mop the floors. There's an entire
There's a lot of
multi-layer.
labor.
Yeah, there's multi-layers of labor that is involved in maintaining these hospitals and keeping people healthy. The nurses have not gotten any pay raises. One of the key issues in Birmingham the other week that we saw at UAB was in one specific ICU nurse uh, group. let's call it a group. They got $1 increase in their pay. No one else got anything. The hospital or the administration are pitting workers one against the other to keep these wages low, to keep from having to pay uh, what should be the lion's share of the income that's coming in, because you see a doctor, maybe once a day for 5 minutes, but these nurses are doing 99% of the work. They're getting almost, I mean, it's sickening the pay that they're getting. And then you have the state through Governor Ivey and the legislation that has sunk $12 million just this past year in our taxpayer dollars to pay private out of state nurses to come into these hospitals. And these out and look, I'm not demeaning these travel nurses. They're if I was in the same situation, if I'm making have the opportunity to make $70-$80 an hour, I'm going to take it. But
Oh yeah, of course.
what they're doing is uh, they're artificially killing the nurses in our state at the cost of taxpayer dollars. So they're basically subsidizing all of these out of state nurses to come in, paying them extremely high wages, and it's killing the nurses in our state. They're not getting anything extra, and they're working right alongside these same people, and it's a travesty. It's an absolute travesty, and they act like they can't figure out why they can't retain these nurses. Well, they can't retain them because they're not invested in the workforce in the state. We have a tremendous workforce in this state that you could take that money, and instead of paying people 3 to 4 times the average salary of what we pay in our state, you could increase those wages, show the appreciation to the nurses that we have in this state, and retain them. But no, they're paying this, and it goes back to the same thing. These travel nurses aren't independent contractors, they're working through agencies. Agencies are getting a cut out of this. Same thing as temp worker agencies. So I guess to kind of tie everything together, under this privatization of public services, they're doing the same thing even in this. The the state government is subsidizing out of state nurses instead of investing in people that are going to stay, that live in our state and are going to stay in this state once this pandemic has subsided enough that all the other nurses go back to wherever they came from. We're not benefiting anything from it.
Right. How much of that 12 million could have been kept right here inside of our borders versus with this practice, how much of that $12 million is leaving the state of Alabama to go to the agency, to be sent back home when these workers return home from wherever they're coming from? I don't blame those nurses one bit. I do blame uh, Governor Ivey and the hospital administrators for their lack of action on this. And yeah, for this is a problem they have facilitated, a problem they've created, and now they're dividing and pitting different types of workers against each other. But you're exactly right. I would have much rather seen that 12 million stay to our folks that we have right here. That money would have been spent right in our community.
Yeah, well,
This would
the
have
ones
helped.
that sacrificing, that has
It,
been
right.
sacrificing for the
These are
last
our
year and a half.
neighbors.
Exactly. They're the
So
ones
I
we're going to count on once all the other nurses have left. And they're the ones that
exactly.
we're just absolutely pissing off and causing them to go to other industries because they're not shown the support that they should be shown.
Because one day this pandemic will end and we'll still need nurses in Alabama.
Yeah, on Twitter, but I've got a member. He's 25 years old. He was married a month ago to a 23-year-old young lady. Both of them caught COVID, possibly at the wedding. It's hard to say. She's 23, no health problems. She's been on a ventilator for the last week and a half, 2 weeks. They took her off 2 days ago. She couldn't breathe on her own. They've got her back on the ventilator now. This is a 23-year-old young lady.
Mm.
This virus is really affecting people. It's a coin toss. You may get it bad, you may not get it bad, but I'll implore you, especially those folks in that age group, go out and get the vaccine. You know, there's there's no reason to have loss of life and for people in their 20s. For no loss of life at all, but the problem is you see a lot, especially in my workplace. I've got a lot of healthy folks in that age group that say there's no reason for me to get the vaccine because I'll get over it. Well,
But maybe you
there's
won't.
yeah, there's two families now that are suffering because of just one dumb mistake.
Yeah.
That could have been easily fixed. And I'm not saying that would have kept her from getting COVID, but it's a good possibility it would have kept her off of a ventilator.
God, well, I am glad you brought that up, but I really hate to hear that, and I definitely echo that message. And believe me, you're looking at two people who, regardless of what your politics may be, I can pretty much assure you that the two of us on this talk are more skeptical of the government and the media than anyone else who may be tuning in. You're going to be hard pressed to find folks more skeptical than us of authority. Um, but I am fully vaccinated. My wife is fully vaccinated. We've had our share of COVID scares. We had COVID last fall when school started. My wife was, perfectly healthy 31-year-old who was taken down. I mean, in severe pain, crying just to make it up the stairs or to change clothes because her whole body broke out in hives from head to toe, and she got it at school. And they had to shut her school down at the time. That was pre-vaccine. So I am thankful we have vaccines available. Encourage folks to get it and to use some common sense the best you can. Because, yeah, there's enough that we have that we're all dealing with besides this virus. So, my thoughts are out to those folks of yours out your neck of the woods. I hope that both of them end up okay. And I hope nobody else ends up in that situation needlessly. But no, I didn't have anything else beyond that. I think that's a fine place to end. I appreciate all the folks who have been continuing to just send us kind words throughout this little weird period of our show. We will be back to full strength and full speed at some point down the road, hopefully sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, we'll continue to do what we can to bring you some updates about the labor movement and really encourage you to stay tuned to us, share our stuff, check out some of the older interviews and segments that you may have missed. I know that David and Jacob did some really cool, interesting stuff well before I even got on the show. So there's a lot out there, and I think that's really all I have. Appreciate everybody who's been participating, and hopefully you will stick with us next time.
I see. Maybe next weekend. We're still talking about what's the plan for next weekend.
Yeah. Well, I do. Like I said, Alabama Rise has their annual convention, like at this exact time slot next Saturday. Probably going to be trying to participate in that. I am a member. Want to exercise my voting privileges there. But yeah, just stay tuned. I'm sure we'll have something coming up within the next week.
I may see if I can bring in some, maybe a guest host and see if we can put something together just to keep the Saturdays going. We'll see. I'll try to look into that this week.
Or we can record something maybe beforehand. Either way, definitely want to
do our best to bring you some content on Saturday.
Absolutely, yeah.
Solidarity, brother.
Solidarity to you, to everyone listening. Y'all have a great Saturday and a great weekend.
Breaking the window.
All right, man, you still on?
Still here.
Okay, all right. Yeah, as far as Saturday, it doesn't matter.
Mutual aid
If
is a
you
guiding factor behind anarchist
somebody
practice
who's interested
and an
and wants to
essential
do that
framework
with
for
you live,
understanding
that's
anarchist
awesome.
views
If
on
not,
social organization more broadly. So, what is it exactly? Well, in its simplest form, mutual aid is a motivation at play anytime two or more people work together to solve a problem for the shared benefit of everyone involved. In other words, it means cooperation for the sake of the common good. Understood in this way, mutual aid is obviously not a new idea, nor is it exclusive to anarchists. In fact, the earliest human societies practiced mutual aid as a matter of survival, and to this day, there are countless examples of its logic found within the plant and animal kingdoms. To understand anarchists' specific embrace of mutual aid, we will need to go back over 100 years to the writings of the famous Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, who, in addition to sporting one of the most prolific beards of all time, just so happened to be an accomplished zoologist and evolutionary biologist. Back in Kropotkin's day, the field of evolutionary biology was heavily dominated by the ideas of social Darwinists such as Thomas H. Huxley. By ruthlessly applying Charles Darwin's famous dictum, survival of the fittest, to human societies, Huxley and his peers had concluded that existing social hierarchies were the result of natural selection, or competition between sovereign individuals, and were thus an important and inevitable factor in human evolution. Not too surprisingly, these ideas were particularly popular among rich and politically powerful white men, as it provided them a pseudoscientific justification for their privileged positions in society, in addition to providing a racist rationalization of the European colonization of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Kropotkin attacked this conventional wisdom when in 1902 he published a book called Mutual Aid, a factor in evolution, in which he proved that there was something beyond blind, individual competition at work in evolution.
Oh, I'm good any morning.
Kropotkin demonstrated that species that were able to work together, or who formed symbiotic arrangements with other species based on mutual benefit, were able to better adapt to their environment and were granted a competitive edge over those species who didn't or couldn't. In today's metropolitan societies, people are socialized to see themselves as independent, self-sufficient individuals, equipped with our own condos, bank accounts, smartphones, and Facebook profiles. However, this notion of human independence is a myth, promoted by corporations and states seeking to mold us into atomized and easily controlled consumers, concerned primarily with our own short-term well-being. The truth is that human beings are incredibly interdependent. In fact, that's the key to our success as a species. Do you ever spend time thinking about where the food you eat or the clothes you wear come from?
Have a good
What
week.
about the labor and materials that went into building your house or your car? Left to fend for ourselves without the comforts of civilization, few among us would survive a week, let alone be able to produce a fraction of the myriad commodities we consume every day. From the Great Pyramids commissioned by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to today's global spanning production and supply chains, the primary function of the ruling class has always been to organize human activity, and everywhere that they have done so, they have relied on coercion. Under capitalism, this activity is organized through either direct violence or the internalized threat of starvation created by a system based on private ownership of wealth and property. Capitalism can inspire people to do amazing things, as long as there is a profit to be made. But in the absence of a profit motive, there are many important tasks that it will not and cannot ever accomplish, from eradicating global poverty and preventable diseases to removing toxic plastics from the oceans. These monumental tasks require a change in the ethos that would connect us to one another and to the world that sustains us, a shift away from capitalism towards mutual aid. Glimpses of the anarchist ideal of mutual aid can be seen today in communities of open-source software developers and in programmers coming up with new forms of encryption to thwart NSA surveillance. It can be seen in neighbors coming together to organize a daycare collective, and in the aftermath of disasters such as Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, when in the absence of state institutions, perfect strangers rush to one another's aid. It can be seen in the bravery of the white helmets of Aleppo, who risked their lives to pull children from the collapsed ruins of buildings hit by Assad's barrel bombs. Imagine a world in which human activity was not organized on the basis of ceaseless competition over artificially scarce resources, but the pursuit of the satisfaction of human needs, and you will understand a vision of the world that anarchists seek to create.